Story 1. The new roommate was telling a funny story about her family. We were all laughing and joking. I asked a simple follow-up question. She casually mentioned that her brother was in jail for killing their father with a shotgun. She was sincere. It was a record-scratch moment. Story 2. I eat slugs. They are like escargot without the shell. He was in the same hospital as I was, being treated for liver flukes. Story 3. I was regaining consciousness after surgery when I heard one woman ask, "What is she in here for?" About me. Another woman said, "She must be dying. I think everyone on this wing is." I had just had gallbladder surgery, but I showed the nurses I could walk and could urinate quickly so I could be discharged. Story 4. Someone once said, "If I went missing, I think it would take days for anyone to notice." They laughed, but it hit me hard. How many people feel that way? Story 5. I told an elderly man I liked his hat. It was a bowler, English-looking hat. He thanked me and said he got it after learning that the man who had molested him was not his biological father, and that his biological father was British. He was likely still carrying a great deal of trauma. Story 6. Listening to my American grandfather casually drop horrific things he saw when he fought in World War II. If you ask him about farm life, he will say that he hates open pastures. He remembered one time he saw 2 Sherman tanks blown to pieces about 100 yards away. He saw the tank commander jump out on fire, only for the Germans to cut him down. That is why he hates open fields. Story 7. When I was 6, my mom used to tell me to kill myself. She told the whole story of her abusive household in a casual voice, as if it were no big deal, but I do not know. Story 8. About 12 years ago, my neighbors, a father and son, were presumably arguing about money. "You tried to kill me. That was 3 months ago." Story 9. Sitting at Thanksgiving dinner one year, my mother leaned over and said, "I don't think your father died of a heart attack. I think he killed himself." Story 10. After having my baby boy, they had to reconstruct my anus. Story 11. I met a girl in one of my freshman college classes and realized we lived in the same dorm, so we walked back together. We continued a discussion from class, and the topic of abortion came up. She said her family was strongly against it, regardless of the circumstances, but she thought it should be allowed in extreme cases. Then she said, "When I was raped, I was only 13, and my parents were going to make me keep it. I had a miscarriage, though, so it was okay." Story 12. I had a new coworker who creeped me out from the moment he started. A few months later, he came to work saying he was exhausted. When another coworker asked why, he said his girlfriend's daughter, about 9 years old, had a sleepover the night before. He said, "They were loud," then made a face of disgust and said, "They were jumping around and dancing in their nightgowns and pajamas, bouncing and giggling with me sitting right there. They knew exactly what they were doing. Women act like little girls are innocent, but they know." Update. I was relieved to learn that this man died about a year later of an accidental overdose from mixing several prescription medications. This was only one of many gross encounters I had with him. He was racist, deeply hated women, and obviously sexualized children. The world is a better place. Story 13. I struck up a conversation with a pregnant woman at work and asked how excited the baby's father was. She replied in a matter-of-fact way that he was taking too long to decide, so she stopped taking birth control and did not tell him. I said that he must be surprised. Story 14. I already submitted one, but I remembered something more disturbing. I was at my friend's house, and a few other people stopped by. One of them was a drug dealer, and my friend really did not want him there, but someone else had invited him. My friend was in a tough position socially, so he begrudgingly let the man inside. The man put some kind of drug in my tiny splash of champagne. I was pretty much straight edge at the time. I had to lie down and became sick. I told my friend that I must have been drugged and asked him to get the man out. We came up with a plan. My friend would say, "I think we should all go to dinner while James Baxter sleeps. She is not feeling well." That would get them all out. After they went out the door and were halfway down the stairs, I overheard the man say to my friend something like, "Actually, you know what? I think I am going to stay here and rest too. I am going to head back up." Thankfully, my friend said, Absolutely not. You are coming with us. He had to argue with the man quite a bit because the man insisted he wanted to stay, meaning he wanted to be alone with me. I have zero doubt. I am 1000% certain this man was planning to rape me. I found out 2 years ago that he mysteriously died. It was a massive relief because I am positive he was a serial rapist. He was so cavalier about it. There were only, I think, 6 people there. It was not even a big party. Story 15. My 18-year-old adopted daughter totaled her car right after buying it for $8,000 more than it was worth at a shady lot. Her birth mother took her there. I had nothing to do with the purchase. She was driving without a license or insurance. Immediately after the crash, she said, "Well, at least I do not have to make those payments anymore," because she believed that if the car was totaled, the debt would go away. Story 16. I used to work in criminal defense and was sitting in a private room at my county courthouse, which is also in the state capitol. There were attorneys, district attorneys, clerks, and police officers in the room, and we were all just chatting. A police officer was talking about something he had done over the weekend, and a district attorney told him that was illegal. The police officer said, "I am here to enforce the law, not obey it." I raised my eyebrows in disbelief, and everyone else laughed loudly. Felt surreal, like I had gone insane. I no longer work in law. Story 17. From a surprised recruiter during a first face-to-face meeting. "Oh, you didn't sound black on the phone." Edit. I should clarify that the recruiter was not talking to me. They were referring to the candidate who went into the interview before me. Story 18. A very popular football player at my high school was known for being charismatic, charming, and a joy to be around. I was introverted and not very social, but I enjoyed when he was in the room. One day I overheard him say he had killed a kitten by stacking bricks on it. He was in a video or an application with a meowing sound that seemed to remind him of what he had done. He was laughing about it. I am fairly certain that man will be in jail one day if he is not already. I might look him up now. Story 19. He kissed me. He was intense, but I told him he was my brother. I was an elevator operator in a 100-year-old building with a bar. I stopped between floors for this. Story 20. When I started college in Tennessee, I was hanging out in the cafe with some older students I had met during orientation. I excused myself to go to the restroom, but they told me I should not use that one because it was for a different race. One of them used a racial slur. The restroom for folks like us was on the other side. It is amazing the things people will just say if they think you are in the group. Suffice it to say, I found better friends elsewhere. Story 21. More than 20 years ago, I was talking with an old acquaintance at a bar while watching football with some friends. We were 21, and I had not seen him since high school. I had heard that after graduation he hit a man on a motorcycle and killed him. He casually brought it up and I asked what had happened. He said that he did not care. He had been packing a bowl in his work truck and had run him over. He then laughed and moved on. His father was the police chief. He is a police officer now. Story 22. Sorry, I cannot assist with content that sexualizes minors. Here are safe alternatives suitable for text-to-speech. My coworker made a deeply inappropriate comment about a family member, and I am shocked. My coworker said something disturbing about a relative. I am at a loss for words. Story 23. In high school, I walked in on a drug deal in the gym. A student was pressuring his friend to try crack. I also woke up after surgery once. My mother told me I had died on the operating table for a few seconds. That felt less disturbing, probably because I knew how it turned out, while I still have no idea what happened to those students. Story 24. A coworker told me about her trip to the store the day before. How she got all her groceries, ran her husband over in the driveway, and made a fabulous eggplant parmesan for dinner. Then she said, "Oh, my break is over." Story 25. A guy threw a ball for my dog. As my dog brought it back, he said, "Isn't it strange that they killed all the dogs that didn't do this?" As if he had made some profound philosophical observation. How the hell do you think dog breeding works? Also, one day a neighbor's very old dog wandered down. Sweet boy. I brought him back home. He said maybe I shouldn't have done that because the dog is old at the end of his life and it might be better if he got hit by a car, nature and all. Fuck you, Jason. Story 26. The Holocaust was a good way to get rid of 3 million breeding pairs of Jews. A man my friend was trying to set me up with said this to my face in Canada around 1996. My parents are Holocaust survivors. Story 27. I am in healthcare. When I first started out, I had a very wealthy patient say, "I will punch you in the face like I did all 3 of my wives." His father was a famous author, and his son lived off the family wealth. Story 28. I was an environmental services housekeeper in a hospital, waiting for the elevator. It opened, and 2 nurses were having a discussion. One of them said, "If you don't want your patients to die, don't mess with my work. That's how I see it." I did not ask for context. They ignored my existence entirely, as is often considered ideal in a housekeeping role. Story 29. The other day a student said, "Do not make me kill you." A few weeks earlier the same student asked, "Do you want to kill me?" In August another student repeatedly said he wanted to die. They are both 5 years old. The children are not all right. Story 30. In a local bar, I overheard a gangster tell his friend that he had chopped off a man's finger who owed him money, and that he would chop off more of his body if he did not pay. He also said that if the man committed suicide, he would go after his family. Story 31. A man told me he wanted to know what humans taste like. He asked if I would come to his house and let him try pieces of my leg. He promised he would not kill me. Story 32. A couple is fighting. He says, "I am going to take all of your left shoes and throw them in the river." Diabolical shit right there. Story 33. My late father-in-law, who fought on D-Day and in the Battle of the Bulge, spoke only once about his experiences to my wife and me. The most disturbing story he told was that they were trapped in a hedgerow, and a German woman outside her house was motioning to soldiers where they were pinned down. They shot and killed her. He said it was her or us. Story 34. Fat white dude. What is it? It's a bottle of tempera. Middle-aged black woman. What is tempera, sir? Fat white dude. It's paint. I am an artist. Middle-aged black woman. What color paint, sir? Fat white dude. How can that possibly matter? Red. Look, it's just right in there. This doesn't have to be a big production. It will take 1 minute. Reach 2 fingers in and grab it. I don't need to be admitted or anything. 2 minutes. Please. This was at the registration desk in a hospital urgent care. The man had a jar of red tempera paint stuck in his rectum and had to describe his problem in front of a waiting room of 30 people in a hushed but still loud and pleading voice. Story 35. I was walking my dog past a high-profile private boys' school on the last day of the school year. They were breaking up for the summer holidays. A boy of about 15 came out with a group of friends, rubbed his hands together and said, "All right, rape season." Story 36. The man who ran the local pizza shop had been drinking one night and mentioned that the reason his family immigrated to the United States was that his father, an older man who always sat in the corner of the restaurant reading, had strangled someone to death in a bar fight. They had to leave their home country to avoid prosecution and retribution. Story 37. When I was a kid, there was a 13-year-old boy in our friend group who thought a woman on a show we were watching was attractive. While we all talked about how attractive she was, this particular boy said he would like to rape her and laughed about it. Story 38. I was on the train heading into work, and 2 middle-aged men standing inches away from me were talking about rape. I cannot even remember what they were saying, but after 5 minutes I finally said, "Hey, do you really think talking about rape around a dozen women is cool?" One man looked ashamed. The other glared at me for the rest of the ride. They were disgusting. Story 39. I used to teach women living with the human immunodeficiency virus and their children in an underserved Maasai community. As she crossed her classmate's name off the class list, a student told me plainly, "Elizabeth won't be coming to class anymore." Story 40. I went on a first date and, unprompted, he started talking about celebrity crushes, saying he never had any growing up. He said people assumed he was gay because he did not like celebrities, but he claimed he did not like them because they had all been used. My red flags immediately went up and I asked, "What do you mean?" He said, "No one wants a woman who has had sex before. They have been used and no longer have any worth." In shock, I asked again, "What do you mean?" He then compared women who have had sex to the usefulness of a used napkin. I had never encountered such blatant misogyny in person. Story 41. When I was 12, I was at a friend's house waiting for my parents to pick me up. My mother called and said they would be late because my favorite uncle had died. He coughed too hard, his artery burst, and he bled on the floor. They were catching the blood in kitchen bowls, so they needed to clean up the mess first. Click. That is how my uncle died of lung cancer. Story 42. I was at a hardware store in a small town in the hills. I overheard a mother and son arguing about when they were going to use methamphetamine. They decided they would do it after they finished their chores. Story 43. A brownish-red, thick-bearded, somber, lonely man in a church in Barcelona, Spain, praying and repeating, "If I kill someone, will the voices stop? Will things get better?" Over and over while rocking back and forth on his bench. I used to see him on my commute to work all the time, always alone, with one exception when I saw him with someone who could have been his father, which surprised me. He always looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his back. I was so affected that if I had not been making a lot of money in Barcelona and advancing rapidly in my job, I would have left the city. I stopped walking home and stopped going to the church. I never forgot him. Story 44. I worked at a convenience store for 4 years in southeastern Kentucky. Almost daily, rednecks or drug users would threaten me. They would say things like, "Oh, you sell Marlboro cigarettes $1 more than down the road? Guess I personally deserve to have my skull caved in." I had long hair. That seemed to be enough for someone to take me out back and put me down. These are real things that were said, and there were many similar incidents over the course of 4 years. All that for $9 per hour. Story 45. I work with children who have severe behavioral issues and act out in many ways. After an escalation, when a client had calmed and we were returning to baseline, or what is known as their normal, they began to talk about the abuse that had occurred where they lived before coming to our group home. They spoke calmly, as if explaining why blue was their favorite color. Story 46. My uncle said my wife and I need to have babies so there are more white people in the country. My grandfather said my wife's doctor of philosophy was worthless and that therapy was for socialists. My grandmother said God was punishing the country because of gay people. All in the same weekend. We do not talk to that side of the family anymore. Story 47. A coworker once said people on welfare should be fed expired food. Another coworker once said that if he had a list of people on welfare, he would kill them to lower his taxes, and then he admitted that his girlfriend's child receives free school lunches and healthcare because she does not report her tips. Story 48. I used to hitchhike around the United States. Once I was picked up outside Bellingham, Washington, by a man who seemed normal at first. He began driving like a maniac, speeding and hopping curbs, and he told me he would cut me up and put me in his spaghetti sauce and that his mother would not hear me scream because she was deaf. Shortly after, he rear-ended another car at a red light, and I took the opportunity to get out of his vehicle. He sped off, and thankfully I never saw him again. Story 49. I was at a sidewalk cafe in Manila. There was a television in the corner broadcasting news. One report was about a schoolgirl who committed suicide after being gang-raped by 3 men. They had caught the rapists and showed their faces on screen. A Filipina sitting 2 tables away said, "I'd kill myself too if I were raped by someone that ugly." Story 50. My friend's boyfriend said, "I fucking hate that dude. I'm tempted to go rape his girlfriend right in front of him." This was about someone he was having roommate problems with. He was angry that he was being kicked out and not the other guy. I had never looked at my friend with such shock. Story 51. I was talking about hunting with a coworker I had never worked with before. We were chatting while driving to a stop because we are delivery drivers, and the subject of hunting came up. I recently got back into hunting after about 10 years. First, he said he hunts, but he only likes to shoot the deer. After he shoots them, he leaves them and calls his brother, who may or may not go get them. Second, he said he wants to see what it is like to shoot a person. I said, Okay, that is wild, and I have not worked with him since. Story 52. Okay, I have heard much more disturbing things. I grew up in a kind of step-forward environment. Everything was shiny and pretty, and negative emotions were not allowed. One day, when I was a kid, I was alone with my grandmother looking at family photos. I pointed at my grandfather, her late husband, and asked if she missed him. She told me no, and looked me dead in the eye. At the time, it took my breath away. Story 53. My junkie cousin said she did not believe her drinking and smoking while pregnant caused her daughter's birth defect. She did the same when pregnant with the daughter's brother, and it did not happen to him. Story 54. Walking down the street, I passed a crew working on a hole. An older man said to a younger man, "Don't fight your new bride in the kitchen. That's her space, and she knows where the knives are." The older man had a scar that started on his forehead and ran down his face. Story 55. Sorry, I can't help rewrite content that describes sexual activity involving animals. I can, however, help produce a neutral, non-sexual version suitable for text-to-speech. Example: he asked to insert a tube into my body and place an object inside so it would become trapped. Tell me if you want a different tone or wording. Story 56. My sister heard a coworker say, "Man, I wish I could kill my siblings." My sister laughed and said, "Yeah, don't we all feel that way?" The coworker stared. My sister asked, "You were joking, right?" The coworker stared at her with a blank face. Story 57. I was at my court date today, and apparently a driving under the influence case is handled differently when someone is killed. Story 58. I had a friend who was rushing a fraternity, so I sat down with him and his new friends in the lunch hall just as they began bragging about sexual assaults they claimed to have committed. They did not call them rape, but described in full detail incidents that sounded like rape. Story 59. A teacher referred to her female student as a slut to a coworker. The student was in 3rd grade. It makes me so sad and angry every time I think about it. Story 60. I was arguing with a Russian man who was a United States service member for 15 years and supported Russia's war in Ukraine. I pointed out that they were forcing prisoners to fight and die in large numbers in large-scale wave attacks. His response was, "What? They're just prisoners." Other users attacked him relentlessly in chat until he left the server. He mocked Ukrainian deaths and claimed Ukrainians staged the Russian atrocities to make Russia look bad. Story 61. Me, what made you want to join the military? Them, I want to kill people. Story 62. And I told my daughter, "You're sitting on your qualities." Story 63. My first teaching job, I was in a meeting with all the American literature teachers as they revised the year's curriculum. I asked if any books covered the Black American experience, and whether we could include Frederick Douglass if not. The lead teacher said, "Slavery is too negative. Besides, Black people are so physically advanced now because we made them this way." I asked what she meant and she clarified, "We made them this way through slavery. It worked out in the end." The other teachers agreed, as if her remarks made sense. That was so long ago, and every time I think about it, it upsets me. Story 64. My mother came to the United States from Cuba many years ago, before Castro took power. She said there was violence in the streets. She told me people were shooting at each other in the streets and that someone set off a bomb. She said she saw a policeman who was hit by the bomb. His head was blown off, but his body kept running. I think she was 13 when she saw this. Thanks for the nightmares, Mom. Story 65. My ex-wife's grandfather was a captain in the Marines during World War II in the Pacific Theater. He was diagnosed with dementia late in life, and before he lost the ability to speak, he became open about his time in the war. I was all for it because he had never said anything before, and now I was hearing incredible stories about battles and campaigns I'd only seen in movies. One night at a family cookout, we were sitting around, watching the sun go down and talking. He told a story about the time after the Japanese surrendered and were occupied. This is a paraphrase. It went something like this. We had to take any weapons or banned items they had. That's where I got my jewelry box. We asked if it was ornately carved and why that was banned, but he said, It's an old shoebox where I put all the watches, gold teeth, rings, and jewelry we took from the Japanese. A lot of those women tried to hide their rings and bracelets between their breasts or tucked into their groins, but we always found them. Many people didn't know to remove their gold teeth beforehand, but we got them. I have 50 or 60 Japanese watches I'm handing down to the boys when I go. He laughed wildly. He stopped and noticed that everyone around the table was horrified. You could see a moment of clarity cross his face, and he said, that story was a lot funnier in 1946. He was always known as a war hero and the incorruptible patriarch of her family. He remained so for years after, but that story more than anything showed me how horrible war is and what seemingly good people are capable of doing to each other. Story 66. My ex-husband seriously told me that I was in no way involved in the birth of our 3 children. Think about that. Story 67. While we were doing a freshman community service project during our first week of college, one student told a supposedly funny story about how he and his friends disliked a man in his hometown because he yelled at children for playing too close to his property, so they threw rocks at his cat. He added, laughing, that the old man died on his porch and no one noticed for several days because they thought he was a Halloween decoration. That was the first sign of how creepy he was, but not the last. The worst was when one of my roommates left our bedroom door unlocked and he came into the room and stood there in the middle of the night until I snapped out of my half-asleep daze and yelled at him to leave. Story 68. I remember a high school teacher casually mentioning that one of the perks of the job was giving students extra credit. It was an open secret. Story 69. What do you think about having a black socialist for governor? The casual racism from a coworker I had liked up to that point was ugly. Story 70. I was walking through the campus of a fairly large party school and heard a woman on the phone say, "It was my turn to buy." "Yes, Mom, we buy $2,000 worth of cocaine each weekend. Do not act like you did not do the same in college." Story 71. In Bosnia, I spoke with a mercenary working as a sniper for the Croatian Defense Council. I was on the Bosnian Muslim side as an aid worker. I asked him if he would shoot me if I were in his sights. "No, they are not paying me enough to shoot my friends." It was clear there was some sum of money that would persuade him to shoot his friends. Story 72. A friend invited me to a tabletop game night with some of his friends. He warned me that they often had some messed up conversations, but I was not expecting the last time I was in a prison riot on my first night. I later invited another friend to join the group, and on her first night it was, if you want to take down a 747 from the ground, you would do it like this. The group was very intelligent, high-level information technology professionals with a wide range of interests who liked to spitball crazy ideas. Story 73. Probably when my mom kept describing what it felt like to slit my shin with a knife in my brother's shin. Psychosis episodes get really intense sometimes. Story 74. When I was in grade school, a schoolmate told me that rain falling from the sky is Jesus's tears, and proceeded to drink rainwater from the roof gutters. Why was I disturbed by it? The following week, the school cleaned those rooftops and collected a large amount of cat droppings. Story 75. A woman was prepared to accuse a man of sexual assault because he did not respond to her friend's text in a timely manner. As a woman, I was shocked. I confronted her, but the experience has not left my mind. Being willing to ruin an innocent person's life over a delayed text response was astonishing. Story 76. Years ago, a coworker had been overhearing a group of us talk about the first season of the podcast serial when it first came out and became a big sensation, and he decided to start listening to it himself. One day he came in and told me that he knew all the places they discussed on the show, and that the park where the victim was dumped is really a dumping ground for bodies because that is where his brother's body was dumped when he was murdered. He told me this with a smile, excited, as if he had discovered a story about his favorite childhood friends. Story 77. Do you want to go to the emergency room again? A mother yelled at her tantrum-throwing child as he tried to flop to the ground while her partner held him by the arm. I was already annoyed with them for cutting in front of me in line, and then I had to listen to that for another half hour. Story 78. Once, in a team meeting icebreaker about jokes people had played on others, Our team leader casually told everyone that when she was a child, she had convinced her younger brother that he had been raped. She thought it was funny. Everyone was shocked. She was reported to Human Resources, and for a while all of our meetings on the Zoom video conferencing platform were recorded. She became very angry with me because she believed I had reported her. It was not me. Story 79. I know a man from a part-time job who, when we met, was friendly and bubbly and had lots of friends. One day he was talking about his full-time job as a prison guard and, while laughing, told me that he sometimes threatens to rape prisoners to make them obey. He said it worked because they couldn't tell whether he was serious. I stopped talking to him and told our boss, who then fired him. I later found out he worked at a juvenile detention center. Story 80. I would shoot her with a .22 shotgun. The grinning young boy said this when asked what he would do if he got married. Story 81. During a Baptist fundamentalist church service, the pastor, citing biblical authority, explained that wives do not have the right to refuse sex with their husbands. He said that "I have a headache" is not an excuse. I stood up, walked out of the sermon and the church, and left the religion entirely. Story 82. We should just do to the Palestinians what we did to the Indians. My sister-in-law said this over dinner last month. Guess who is not invited to Thanksgiving? Story 83. My helper at work, out of nowhere, explained how he had inserted a large green apple into his girlfriend's anus with her permission. Story 84. Back in high school, I was smoking marijuana with a group of girls in a van. One pointed out that another's shirt had a wet spot. The girl with the wet spot casually told us that her stepfather had raped her, had gotten her pregnant, and that he and her mother forced her to have an abortion. Now sometimes her breasts produce milk for no reason. Story 85. At dinner with a visiting out-of-state friend of my wife, her husband casually referred to his black neighbors as jigabos. My wife didn't catch it, but I did, and I'm secretly glad her friend isn't married to that trash bag anymore. Story 86. I once heard a customer service worker say under his breath, "I'll rip your fucking face off, you cunt." Story 87. My friend said his mom wasn't home that week and asked if I wanted to come over. At the time, I thought it meant she was on vacation or traveling for work while his dad stayed to take care of him. No, she was a single parent who regularly left for a week at a time, leaving him alone with no sitter so she could go gamble in the next town. Story 88. If your mom dies and you're old enough, your choices are either marry me or you get kicked out of the house because it will be mine, my ex-stepdad said. He didn't know, and we weren't going to tell him, that my mother changed her will because she knew he was a piece of trash but couldn't afford to divorce him yet. Story 89. I had intrusive thoughts about harming someone. I am not okay after that. Story 90. I stopped at a bar just outside Niagara to use the bathroom. Some older men were having a beer, and one shouted so loudly the whole room could hear, "Buddy, you'd love Arizona." Not a single the N-word in sight. I was shocked to hear that in Canada of all places. Story 91. During a dinner party, a man I did not know told the whole table that he and his construction co-workers had found a body inside a wall at a job site and had disposed of it instead of informing the authorities. Story 92. Between September and December 2014, I was living in Ciudad del Carmen, Campeche, Mexico, where there is a large oil services industry, working for a Chinese company. In the housing compound where our company's workers lived, there were also some underwater welders from the southern United States. Some of the older guys were extremely racist, complaining, "Why did they rename Brazil nuts?" They did not use to complain about the name. This was not the scary part. One evening after heavy drinking around the barbecue pit in the housing complex, the foreman became emotional while telling work stories. I, an American in my mid-20s at the time, was sitting there drinking a Modelo beer and listening. He casually admitted he had left an old coworker to die during an underwater accident. Not in the sense of, "I did everything I could to rescue him, but we could not get to him." But he began talking about how he hated this coworker and did not like his attitude. So when the coworker had an accident, he did nothing and watched him die instead of intervening. Because it was just the two of them underwater, no one had ever challenged him. In retrospect, it was like the log roller in the movie The Lighthouse. He alternated between laughing and gloating about getting away with it, being coldly clinical, and choking back tears. The mood at the barbecue became very quiet, tense, and uncomfortable. The macho, good old boy underwater welders and oil platform wildcatters, who a few moments earlier had been shouting racial slurs and profanity, were visibly uncomfortable. They ushered their manager off to bed and made awkward comments and forced laughs about how he had been drinking too much. In short, I was at a barbecue and a man confessed to murder. Story 93. If you hear people say Hitler was misunderstood, remember that whoever says it is a Nazi piece of shit. Story 94. He said that a man shouldn't lose his job as an attorney just because he was arrested for beating his wife. Story 95. I worked as a contractor overseas. I worked with another man who was a total tool. He bragged about having a bodybuilding buddy who would grab stray cats by the tail and slam them on the ground to kill them. I told him, straight-faced, that I would not lose a wink of sleep killing his badass friend. I also took a shot at him. After 20 years in the military, he was a pretty low rank, and I said, I guess when you don't have any people your rank to hang out with after 19 years of service, you find yourself in the presence of pieces of shit like this. I am no badass or stone-cold killer, but I am a 6'3", 270-pound Marine Corps veteran, and I would have little problem helping humanity in this case. Story 96. I am a paramedic. A patient with multiple yeast infections said, it could make bread down there. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not always the obvious thing you see. Story 97. Coworker. It's like banging your cousins. We've all done it. Story 98. You can go. We just want to rob this store. Some kid said to me casually while holding a gun to my face at the wrong gas station after midnight. Story 99. A random woman tells her friend that her husband has no idea the children are not his. Let him pay and raise them until his dumb ass figures it out. Story 100. How they were going to kill my former caregiver. To be fair, I had told them about the abuse she inflicted on me, but their tone suggested that at least one of them might actually have done it if I had given them her location. Story 101. My frail grandmother laughed at the news of a man being raped because she said he is a man and should not be raped. Story 102. I think war is the coolest thing ever invented. Whoever invented war is a genius. I hope an aspiring emergency medical technician never has to care for me. Story 103. My dad was a correctional officer and said he liked tasering people because watching them wet their pants and cry while screaming for their mother was funny to him. He later moved to the Caribbean to retire and said he wanted to grow his hair out and donate it to Locks of Love, but only if he was guaranteed it would go to a black child living in the Caribbean because it would be funny if a black child were wearing a blonde wig. He is no longer in my life. Story 104. Years ago, I was on the phone with a friend who lived across from the university dorms. While we were talking, he suddenly said, "Hold on a moment. There's a man climbing the facade like Spider-Man." He gave a blow-by-blow commentary in a completely bored, I've seen it all voice. When the man reached the third floor, my friend then said, "Oh, he slipped. Back to square one, I suppose. Not that he will get another chance, from the looks of it." He refused to elaborate and eventually hung up. I read about it later in the newspapers. The man had fallen 3 stories and landed on the iron fence surrounding the dorm. Story 105. When Brokeback Mountain first came out, I only saw about the last hour. This was a long time ago, you could not just stream it then. I saw it on cable. At work. While we were outside smoking and talking about movies, I said, I finally saw Brokeback Mountain. It did not seem that gay, really. Nothing was too crazy. Not sure all the fuss. Just 2 men who love each other. I'd probably be guilty of the same. Apparently I missed some of the more explicit scenes, including spitting on hands in the mountains. Story 106. I think many parents can relate to this. I walked in the side door at home and told my parents I think I hurt myself. I had fallen off my bike as a child. I broke my nose and my jaw was bleeding, had road rash on my arm, required 2 layers of stitches, and my teeth and braces were crooked. I was in shock, and the pain did not set in until we reached the emergency room. I do not recommend faceplanting into the road. You do not get everyone to sign a cast on your face, you have to go on a liquid diet, and you may end up with a permanently crooked nose. Story 107. I was walking to English class when I heard someone walking the other way mention something about a plane hitting the World Trade Center. Story 108. I was in the car with my mum, and a woman wearing a hijab was crossing the road. My mum said, "Ugh, look, another one of them. I should just run them over. D. Muslim D." My dad said, "Muslims are taking over the world, and it's just a matter of time before they start forcing you to wear a headscarf and make you pray to Allah." I just love going online and calling them lying pigs. The world is better off without them. I know they're all talk, but I find this really disturbing. I'm hoping I was switched at birth or adopted, because I feel repulsed at the idea of sharing genes with these people. Story 109. I managed a deli for 10 years and had an older man named Spidey who was a regular customer. He told me he had a separate computer just for his porn collection, so if the police or the Federal Bureau of Investigation came, he could destroy it. Then he laughed. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.